They may have been, I don't
They
know.
were, that whole class will migrate.
Y'all doing all right?
How are you?
Pretty good.
Who is that?
Jerry Brown.
They were profit.
Were they in the
All
Brown
those people.
Yeah.
Probably in
Yeah, which one are you
Linda
saying?
and Gerald Brown.
I have seen where it was.
Okay.
The rest, what did they call it? Yes. What do they call it?
The others are-
Oh, that's morning.
What they call it?
So this is week 2 of Dennis and Laura here.
Yes, here we are.
And along with my disclaimer for any technical malfunctions with the recording equipment, Dennis left me in charge of that. I'm okay with recording the class. It's the downloading onto YouTube. And I hope you all see the irony of that Dennis, the baby boomer, has to teach me, the Gen X person, how to download something onto YouTube.
You're not baby boomer?
I
Everybody's a baby
know.
boomer.
I was going to say. And for those of you who weren't here last week, since we're talking about generational stages, Robert just had his 91st birthday. So I noticed some of you all were mentioning that, so I thought I'd mention it again. Announcements. We need ushers. I noticed that on the email that came out this week too. So for anyone who's interested, it's kind of the down season right now for attendance. And so I think that means they're a little short on ushers. So if anybody's been interested in that or curious about it, or you know anybody that is, contact Abby Adcox. Her email is on page 8 of the worship folder. What do we have later this month? Oh, they also want to remind everyone, don't be Mr. Anonymous, Miss Missing, or the disappearing family. Make sure to sign up for the church pictorial directory. You should have gotten an email about that. You can also do it online. Also through the church website.
Be nice if they had some morning appointments.
Yeah, are they all in the afternoon?
Trying to get my wife to get dressed and go out in 100-degree heat.
Oh.
It's just about impossible.
Well, that's right. I never thought about it. Yeah, they all start after.
They're all at from 3 o'clock until 5 o'clock.
I thought maybe they just all filled up, and I just
No, I don't
was
think there
glad.
was ever any in the morning.
So anyway, it's been 3 years, 4 years? 4 years.
Four, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah. So it's time.
It's been a very long
overdue.
time.
I think the timing thing has to do with wanting family pictures and parents working. So they don't start them until they.
Yeah, oh, I'm sure.
They didn't consider your wife, did they?
Let's see.
There's a place right over the page.
Later this month, the Children's Music Camp musical will be on July 15th, 5:30. They're doing Oh Jonah. This is you taught on not too long ago, right? Didn't you teach? Okay.
Yeah.
So that will be in a couple of weeks. No, next
No,
week.
it's next week.
Thank you,
I'm working
Jerry.
music. It's one of the things I get to do in
Is
retirement.
that Sarah's last big production
Yes,
endeavor?
it's Sarah's last time.
Okay. And, well, then we will be having a reception for Sarah Stafford at the end of this month, Sunday, July 29th, 4 to 6 p.m. in Community Hall. All are invited. Have I missed any announcements? Anybody else want to add anything? Those are just what I checked off. Anything else coming up this month that I need to mention?
Aren't we sending a mission team to New York this?
Is that this month?
I
That was
thought
in
it was.
August.
That's in August.
August, okay, and then in September it's 10.
And then there's the thing with the homeless people.
Feed the homeless,
Yes.
the Bridge Homeless Recovery Center downtown Dallas. So that's not, oh, that's just a request for volunteers, not a specific
It's first
event.
Thursday. Right.
Okay.
Gotten quite a few responses. About picked up 17.
Ken Adams, Ken is our point of contact for that. Well, that's good. So, I mean, so when, you need to educate me a little bit about that.
We serve food down at the bridge on the first Thursday of every month.
First Thursday. Okay.
And the group was starting to thin out, so had to put that post.
Starting to age out, you can say.
And room in the end is,
July 2021.
yeah, 2021,
There's still spaces available for volunteers for that?
I believe so.
Okay. So that's coming up in, is that all, that's always on a Friday, right?
Friday,
Friday
Saturday.
night.
So Friday night.
Saturday morning. yeah.
Saturday morning.
So two weeks from this Friday. No, 1 week from this Friday. 1 week from this Friday, room at the end. Let's see. We have, you'll need to remind me your names again.
Oh, Laura and Ray Snow.
Thank you, the Snows. Okay, welcome Snows.
Yeah.
Y'all been with us before, I know. So.
Yes.
Although, did Dennis ever, he always, did we make name tags for him?
No, we just came that day when we surprised Tony.
Oh, that's right, okay.
Thomas came.
Okay. Well, welcome back. Glad to have you here. So, all right, well, we'll do prayer requests at the end like normal this week, since I can be here the whole time. So, welcome back, Harry.
Okay.
Glad to have you back. So we're doing this Jonah part 2, Job part 2.
I may be a motor mouth for about the first 10 or 15, 20 minutes, because we have, well, you can see from the scriptures that we have a lot of material to cover, and we need to kind of finish up some of what we didn't do last week. But I'm going to try to summarize some of it, and maybe we can get into some discussion. Just a brief recap. Job is a very old book that dates back to 1000 to 2000 BC. It's in the Genesis era. And it apparently comes out of the folklore of that area, because there are stories from Edom, Samaria, Egypt that are very similar to this story. And over the years, it's had layers added to it. When I did Jonah, in that chapter, the fish swallows him and the fish spews him out. Well, in between is Jonah's prayer. They think that was added. But yet it's very powerful in terms of you have to go to a dark place to get back to God sometimes. And in Job, the same thing is true. Later on, there is a young prophet that comes in and speaks for 4 chapters, I think. None of these people, they're kind of like me, they're long-winded. But they think that was added to the book of Job at some point. And definitely the epilogue and the prologue were added, because they are prose and the rest of the book is poetry. So, but probably it took its current form in that period when Hebrew scribes were putting together much of the Old Testament literature that they felt was relevant to the Israelites' experience of that time after the exile, after their return from the exile. Now, Job is categorized as wisdom literature, which challenges our assumptions when we try to put God in a box. It's probably the easiest way to describe the wisdom literature in the Bible. It's really about raising our awareness of what we don't know about God. And Job is a book that raises multiple questions. The Smith and Hellsworth commentary, and for y'all who are new, you have to understand, as I said last week, I'm a master thief. I steal from all the commentaries I can steal from. So you just keep that in mind. But the Smith and Hellsworth commentary offers 3 categories of questions that are dealt with in Job. What kind of world do we live in? What kind of God is God? What kinds of relationships with God and with others are we created for? So those are pretty big questions, but probably the simpler questions that we run across is why do bad things happen to good people? Where is God when I need Him? How do I pray when I feel like God has abandoned me? So these, and we get to the big question, and that is, how do I decide to trust God anyway? When there doesn't seem to be any reason or any answers for what is going on. Now this book confronts one of the major ideas in the Israeli history and in the religions of that time, which is, if you do wrong, you suffer. If you do good, you get rewarded. And it's called retributive justice, and that will be the last time I try to say that word. It was very, and so the thing about it is, in the Gospel of John, Jesus deals with the same question. They say, who sinned? This man or his parents, that he's blind? And Jesus says, neither one. You know, this is not God's justice, you know, in these kinds of things. But it is the basic idea of when this book opens and the adversary, the accuser, Satan, as my Jewish friend would say, says to God, the only reason Job worships you is because you put a protective hedge around him. No, of course he worships you. Look at what he has. You know, he's rich, he's got all these kids, so why wouldn't he worship you? And then began the trials. You know, so God defends Job, but he lets Satan do his thing. And so Job is a really good guy. He lives in his community the way God would have us all live, with righteousness. And we're going to see a little more of that when we get to chapter 29. But Job is going to enter a consciousness-raising series of events. When he loses his family, his wealth, everything, he kind of says, God gives and God takes away. It's kind of okay, you know, this is what it is. Then when he begins to suffer physically, when he's on that mound covered in sores, and his wife says, you know, why don't you just curse God and die? And I mentioned that the word curse in the Old Testament is kind of funny because it's a word that can also mean bless. It gets translated both ways. It's almost like, why don't you just give up and die, you know? And then he doesn't make a statement. He asks a question, do we accept good from God and not evil? So that's kind of the background. And chapter 2 ends with him sitting there, and his friends come, and they said, 7 days and 7 nights. You know, and the numbers in this, as I said last week, are all very significant. All the numbers have some significant symbolic meaning. But at the end of this 7 days and 7 nights, in chapter 3, Job speaks, and it's his first soliloquy. And he goes through all of this stuff about why didn't I perish at birth? And if he died at birth, he would have joined all of these wonderful people, the kings and the counselors and the rulers. He would be in palaces of gold with silver. And then he talks about being hidden in the ground. And out of this, the commentary says that he is really implying that both the great and the small are equalized in death. And then he says, why is light given to those in misery who seek death? Why is life given to one who does not know where to go. And in this one, in the first thing, we have this protective hedge when God and Satan are talking, and now the hedge is gone. He doesn't know how to relate to God. He's lost his integrity. And this word integrity, which is sort of like piousness or righteousness, is throughout this. And he ends this with, there's no peace, no rest, no quietness, only turmoil. He feels totally cut off. So this gives rise to the question, is he going to be able to find a new integrity? Is he going to be able to find a new way of relating to God? He is, in his thinking, he is innocent. He's done nothing. And so as his soliloquy ends, he's just lost it. He's just, where is God? You know, I don't understand. And we get into chapter 4, and one of his friends is going to speak. And if you'll turn to page 394, this is Eliphaz. He's sort of the lead speaker here. And he starts out very tentative. If you'll, be patient, and this is kind of, I guess, where this patience and Job thing comes from. But look at what he says. Look at 4, 5, and 6. Your words have supported those who were stumbling, and you have made firm the feeble knees. But now it has come to you, and you are impatient. If it touches you, you are dismayed. Is not your fear of God your confidence, and the integrity of your ways your hope? And then 7, think now, who that was innocent ever perished, or where were the upright cut off? In other words, Job, you're guilty of something. You've done something that has caused this suffering. And Job is sort of like, no, I haven't. And so what we're going to get after chapter 4 for the next, I've forgotten, it goes through chapter 28. They're going to argue back and forth. They're going to talk back and forth. The friends are going to explain to him why he must be guilty of something if all of this has happened to him. And Job is going to contend, no, I'm innocent. I haven't done anything that would cause me to be punished by God. And it kind of, throughout, it kind of talks about his day in court. But they're going to give him all the traditional arguments for why he's done something wrong. This friend in chapter 4 is going to talk about the reliable moral order of the universe. Good will triumph, evil will be defeated. Of course, then he turns around and he points out the unworthiness of humankind. Who made that argument before? Satan. So the commentaries are sort of saying this friend and maybe the other friends are going to kind of make these traditional arguments for this kind of justice where if you sin, you suffer. If you're good, you are rewarded. So it was 25 chapters. They're going to try to convince him to believe in this kind of justice. And Job is going to go the other way. So let me ask you this. What are some of the traditional answers you have heard or given? Have you ever looked back and thought, I said so-and-so to this person who was hurting, and how dumb could I be to say something like that? So what are some of those traditional answers that we sometimes give, the cliche answers, you would almost say, for when people are suffering?
God has a plan.
God has a plan.
It's God's will.
It's God's will.
And in the case of death that you laid out and they've been suffering, they'll say, well, it was a blessing.
It was a blessing. Anyone else? How comforting are those answers? So many of the traditional answers, and this is what's going on in these 25 chapters, is they want to give answers when there are no answers, okay? In fact, I heard an SMU professor, and I hope I am not misquoting him because I did not take notes, but one of the things that he said that stood out to me was the why questions, the kind of why questions that Jonah was asking, and why did it, why, in chapter 3, that why questions have the potential, at least, of only making suffering worse. Because not only are you feeling the suffering, you what?
Get some blame attached to it.
You get blame attached to it, or you're trying, or you're looking for somebody to blame. Why did this happen? And it can get to, why did I do something? Because we're kind of all raised with that idea of examining ourselves for what we did wrong instead of what maybe we did right. Anyone else want to join in here on why traditional answers can be more problematic than they are comforting?
When you have children, most particularly teenagers, you tend to stress that, do the right thing. And there's so many examples of people that have just messed up, and you can avoid that. And those things are true, but not all true.
Yeah, we have natural consequences.
It gets confusing, and then the kid internalizes that, and when bad things happen, they're messed up.
Yeah, and that's right, because we don't separate out the things we don't have control over from the things we do have control over. And as I say, we're not talking natural consequences here. If you drive too fast, there's a real good chance you're gonna have a wreck. That's the natural consequences. And when we go back to those chapters where Job loses everything, we also have the wrongdoing of other people. His family is destroyed by these Sabines and whatever that other group was. And then you had natural disasters that destroyed. And sometimes we look at, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but we have a hurricane and someone survives and their neighbor doesn't, and then they kind of want to say, well, God protected me, and you're kind of going, what about your neighbor? I don't know. I don't begin to, this is why the why questions are so difficult. And they can actually cause more confusion than they do answering. But I do think the guy, if what I heard him say, that the why questions can make suffering worse, because there are just some things we don't understand. Yes?
I feel like perhaps our greatest responsibility with the life we've been given is to figure out who God is. What is his nature? What is his character? What does it mean for God to be perfect? Because he is. And this kind of thinking is very harmful to finding out, to discovering, to the correct characterization of God. It mischaracterizes God in a way that you're just not on the right path anymore in terms of understanding who God really is.
Which is exactly what Job is all about, is the way we try to define God.
Sorry. But that whole we started asking why when we were like 2 and 3 years old, right? And cause and effect are a basic cognitive skill that we learn as very young children. So I think it's part of our human nature just to ask why, right?
I think that's right. I think what we're sometimes, especially if we're coming out of a religious tradition, we have to be careful about asking why about God. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I think, I think that all of those wonderful questions, and sometimes children will ask you questions, and it's like, could you wait till you're 13?
Yeah.
Before I answer that. Or my tendency was to over-explain, instead of trying to give a simple explanation that it was age appropriate. But so we get into, all of these issues of asking questions and what is the nature of God, and that is at the heart of what Job is. So let's look a little bit here. We have chapter 29, which starts on page 412. Actually, 29, 30, and 31 are a
Soliloquy.
And let me say this,
Takes an attorney.
most of these arguments for all of these pages with his friends, the commentaries say those are more like internal conversations Job is having. The arguments, it's almost like he's got the friends, but he's really arguing with himself. Now, I do that all the time. I have debates, endless debates with myself. And I'm sure no one else in here does. Y'all laughing at me instead of
It's fine with me until somebody catches me doing it. That's the embarrassing
as my
part.
son did. Well, actually, I was explaining to my principal, but my lips were moving. And my son looked over and said, "Who are you talking to?" There's no words for them. But these are good things because they help us sort things out. And that's what these 25 chapters have been here, is Job and his friends discussing back and forth these issues. But in 29, 30, and 31, one of the commentaries really talks about, this is kind of Job summing up past, present, future. So 29 is past. And if we, and by the way, I need to say this because the structure of this book is incredible. These 3 chapters directly deal with the 3 points that he was making. His 3 big why questions in chapter 3. These 3 chapters address those. So let's look at chapter 29. Would someone read 2 through 6, verses 2 through 6?
Chapter 29.
29, yeah.
Oh, that I were as in the month of old, as in the days when God watched over me. When his lamp shone over my head, and by his light I walked through the darkness. When I was in my prime, when the friendship of God was upon my tent, when the Almighty was still with me, when my children were around me. How far?
6.
One more. Okay. When my steps were washed with milk, and the rock poured out for me streams of oil. Okay.
Those scriptures, he's remembering his personal well-being. So let's look at 7 through 11. Would someone read that?
When I went out to the gate of the city, when I took my seat in the square, the young men saw me and withdrew, and the aged rose up and stood. The nobles refrained from talking and laid their hands on their mouths. The voices of princes were hushed, and their tongues stuck to the roof of their mouths. When the ear heard, it commended me, and when I saw it approved.
Okay? His status in the community. He was an extremely respected man, and this is what he's beginning to remember. Now, let's look at 12 through 17. Could someone read?
Because I delivered the poor who cried, and the orphan who had no helper, the blessing of the wretched came upon me, and I caused the widow's heart to sing for joy. I put on righteousness, and it clothed me. My justice was like a robe and a turban. I was eyes to the blind and feet to the lame. I was a father to the needy, and I championed the cause of the stranger. I broke the fangs of the unrighteous and made them drop their prey from their teeth.
He was some kind of guy, wasn't he? You can see why he might have had a little bit of a problem thinking that he had done something wrong. Because, I mean, the rest of the chapter talks almost in terms of his royal existence. And verse 29, no, it's not, well, well, somewhere in here, he talks about comforting. And I'm sorry, I'm.
25.
25. I chose your way instead of streets, and I lived like a king among the troops, like one who comforts mourners. Thank you. And so it kind of, this chapter sort of leaves you with a question, is he going to find comfort? Because we see what he's been, but let me ask you this, when people are suffering, why is it important for them to recognize the past? When we get caught up in suffering, you know, what do we tend to do? We kind of do an either or, it's all good or it's all bad. You know, and right now, because it's so bad, we're kind of looking at everything as all bad. We can't remember the good. You see what I?
Or we choose not to.
Or we choose not to. Yeah. Well, of course, that's right. I think that is one of the questions that we always deal with, is that we choose meaning for our lives. I mean, the thing I love about modern psychology, it just confirms the wisdom of the Bible, is we choose the meaning and purpose of our lives, as Job has here. And that we can get off track and make bad choices maybe, but ultimately when we are in that, what does it all mean? Why is this happening? It is important to remember the good that is in our lives. But why is it so easy to dismiss the good when we're suffering?
Because it hurts.
Or you're looking for a reason why.
And you're looking for a reason why. Yeah, we're hurting.
We humanize God. God is much bigger than all of us. And we put him on our level of understanding. We try to use our understanding to describe God. Almost like trying to tell a 2-year-old kids about internet.
Or maybe a pre-baby boomer about
Yes. Almost like tell 1-year-old how airplane can fly.
Yeah.
This is beyond their understanding. I think all of us have a Job's moment in our life, sometimes our days even, and how God put us into a situation, and so difficult for us. We're trying to find answer. Yeah, there's no answer, and God did answer you.
And that's what Job is really getting at, is that there's a lack of answers.
Didn't have an answer for you, but yet God is still there.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much in our life, in your life. Every day 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, God in your presence. And that's how trying to seek Him answered humanly, almost impossible. Almost impossible.
And as I said, that is really where Job is going in terms of what is happening in his life. 30 is a mirror image of 29 because he recognized in 29 he sees his past, the goodness of his past, but in 30 he recognizes his present condition and he kind of accepts it. And then in 31 he really makes this oath that binds him to God and to the community. He's gained a more balanced view. His awareness, his consciousness is being raised. And he's beginning to work things out a little more. As I said earlier, 32 through 7 is the young prophet. And so we then move to 38 and 39. In this passage, the writers have God speaking. And we're only, we have 38 and 39, but and then Job will speak a little bit, I think it's in 40, and then we go, but let's look at in 38 through 41, really it kind of gets into what kind of God is God, okay? And God, the writers, as I say, have him speaking. Now, last week I mentioned that the Hebrew Yahweh is mentioned in the prologue. Now we're coming back to it. In all the poetry, Yahweh has only been used 4 times. But now we're coming back where the name, we have the return of the name of Yahweh. Pardon me. As I said earlier, Job has he's kind of like, I'm innocent. But he wants to know, how much have I sinned, and why have you turned your face from me? And David Hester, who's one of the commentaries I use, says that that Job wants his day in court. Remember, this has sort of been a theme throughout, that he feels like when he's sinned, he feels like he's repented. Remember, he's the priest of his family, and he will have sacrifices even when he thinks his children might have done something wrong. So this guy is very conscious of sin, and Hester says that Job wants his day in court, basically. And Hester also writes that for the people coming back after the exile, these chapters would have been very important to them. So Job is about to have his theophany. He's about to encounter God. So let's look at 38, 1 through 3. Now the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind. Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Gird up your loins like a man. I will question you, and you shall declare to me. Where were you? And there's going to be, where were you? What did you create? What can you do? Throughout this whole passage. So we have like 4. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? 12. Have you commanded the morning since your days began and caused the dawn to know its place? 16. Have you entered into the springs of the sea and walked in the recesses of the deep? around our house, we sometimes talk about the come to Jesus moment. Because this is the come to God moment in here. And he just goes on and on. And we get a lot of, in 38, you get nature, the creation. And by the way, everything that the writers have God saying in these passages answer something that Job has said earlier. That little passage that I had mentioned on the sea, well, back early in one of the earlier chapters, Job has talked about the chaos of the sea. So what we have here is just answer after answer to questions and comments Job has made earlier in the book. So, and then in 39, he goes through the creation of the animal world. Now, he doesn't talk about the creation of humans because he's talking to Job. He's talking to a human. God really deals here with, you know, the reality of who are you in terms of who I am. And then, although it was not part of our chapter, of our readings, in 40, the Lord said to Job, "Shall a fault finder contend with the Almighty? Anyone who argues with God must respond." So Job, again, he's not giving, God's not giving Job answers. He's asking him questions for him to think through his idea of who God is. So I didn't, as I say, this was not in here, but in 41, he talks about the Leviathan. That, it is some creature. But when you look at it, you read it, and maybe it's just the literature teacher in me, but I'm getting, this thing is so powerful, he's an awful lot like God. You know, his powers are just beyond belief. I'm not saying that, but symbolically, you read through there and you see what this creature can do. He can do anything, almost. So you might, yes.
Is the Leviathan somewhere else?
Yes, he's mentioned as a creature someplace
In
else.
Job.
I'm not, he may be someplace, I think he's in Revelation somewhere. And he's someplace else, I think. I'm not, as I say, I steal from the best. I don't. But I'm just saying, this, for them to put this chapter in, and this power, it's almost like, okay, maybe it's God is even more powerful than the Leviathan. You can't grasp the kind of power that creature has. Yes?
Is the Leviathan like their Loch Ness monster, like a mysterious creature that everybody's afraid of, but hasn't ever really?
It's a mythological creature, and it's a mythological creature in a sense, and it talks about the fish hook, but the question becomes, we don't, it is a mythological creature. I think you would say, based on the description of it, so yeah, but I think it was something maybe common to that era. It's like the stories that come out of the culture of a geographical area. It's a Middle Eastern, I guess you would say, mythological creature. Unless some of those King James translators decided to put something in that we don't know about. But anyway, I just thought that was interesting. So when he Job is absolutely overwhelmed. So let's look at the last chapter, chapter 42, 1 through 6. Would someone like to read that?
Then Job answered the Lord, I know that you can do all things, and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. Who is this that hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore I have uttered what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me, which I did not know. Hear, and I will speak. I will question you, and you declare to me. I have heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. Therefore I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes.
Okay. Now, earlier I said that Job wanted God the judge, but he got God the wisdom teacher. And this is what has happened. And what you see here is a humbling response to God. He's been transformed. He makes his confession that God is all-powerful and that he, Job, didn't know what he was talking about. He didn't understand. He is we know from his past, he's a wonderfully righteous person. He's full of justice and mercy. But what has he found here? Humility. He has been humbled by this vision of God, this description of God. And that God's world is not an either-or world, it's a both-and world. There are going to be contradictions and ambiguities because of nature, because of the things that go on that we don't understand. But wisdom is knowing when you don't know and accepting what you cannot know. Goes back to what Robert was saying. We can't have the answers. That is why the why questions can be very difficult when you're suffering, because we can't always have the answers. So this humility has entered the picture. There's no indication that he was an arrogant man, but arrogance is not necessarily evidence of a lack of humility. We can take pride in things and not realize that maybe we've crossed over into an area where we've lost our humility. So that pride and humility balance, we're taking pride in what we do, but not taking so much pride in it that we lose our humility, that we lose our understanding of who God is and what our relationship, and that we're doing it for the sake of God. We're not doing it for our sake.
So, that's exactly what I was thinking about this, saying pride comes before a fall. Doesn't mean if you have pride, you're going to fall. It doesn't mean if you have a fall, pride came before it. And I'm thinking about these, and perhaps this is not fair, but some of these, what do you call the people, prosperity ministers like Joel Osteen. It is so hard to be one of those persons and have this growing congregation taking up an entire arena in Houston, or what used to be a sports center, and not get caught up in how important you are.
Well, I think, yeah, and it happens. And I will tell you that Billy Graham's wife was one of the reasons he never fell victim to that. Because he was so courted by famous people that it was easy, and he was so enthralled with famous people, because he was a country farm boy, and here he was sitting with presidents.
And queens.
Queens, and she was able, she literally kicked him under the table one
Yes,
time.
LBJ dinner. Yes.
He was with a president, and the president was trying to get him, and she kicked him
Yes.
under the table to remind him that that's not where he was going to go.
That's right.
But we have to have some way to hang on to the humility. I've got just a couple of minutes here. Let me get on to one of the hardest passages, I think. By the way, 7 through 9 and Hester's commentary on this talks about, God says, the friends are wrong, Job was right. You know, and we'll just leave it at that.
Vindication.
It's vindication. And they have to repent, and God accepts it because Job prays for them. But 10 through 17, he's returned to his state. He's got twice as many cows and sheep and whatever, and he gets the 10 kids back, and his daughters are the most beautiful in the world. He's back in the protective hedge of God. But the people who put the lessons together in your intro that you had, it says, how do we reconcile this happy ending with our own stories that don't necessarily end up happily ever after? When you see how everything is returned to Job, I wish we had time a little bit to discuss this. I've always been uncomfortable with it. But let me, I hear yes, so I'm not the only one. You know, that somehow it's all okay. But let me wrap this up. You know, so what's it all about? What are the messages in Job for us? And I'm a literature teacher, so let me just go here, and you can take it for what it's worth. Job is representative of a person of faith, someone who is outstanding in regard to righteousness and just and being a caring person in his community. But he's also one who is pretty sure that he's got all the answers, that he's got God boxed up and how God works, and he's good. But this person of faith goes through a huge crisis of some kind. And that's represented by the loss. Look at what he loses. He loses family, so it could be a family loss. It could be he loses his wealth. It could be
He lost health.
Lost health. It could be an economic thing. So something happened that caused a crisis of faith. And he is suffering, and everything around him is telling him, you know, you must have done something, or you just don't understand, you know, whatever. But the problem is, his sense of certainty has misled him. Maybe a little bit of the pride, and what is missing is humility. So let me share this. A very conservative Bible scholar went through two very difficult crises at the same time, a family crisis and a career crisis. And he has written this book. What is the opposite of faith? Fear? Fear?
Certainty.
Certainty. You read the book? But that's what he says. It's not doubt. We talk about people doubting. That's not the problem. Doubting might get you to a stronger understanding. But certainty is when you think you already have all the answers. So the suffering makes us question, our certainties. So what we have here with Job is he is a man of faith who maybe got a little too far out on that certainty road, and something happened, and it made him question everything that he had believed. But what happens is, because he comes to understand he can't have all the answers, he's humbled. And he understands that he can't know everything about God. And he ends up having to choose, trust God anyway. That is faith, is to trust God anyway when you don't have the answers. And how many people have you known who have gone through horrible crises and they've come out on the other end with, I don't understand, but I'm gonna trust God anyway. And I think that's part of what this story of Job is all about for me. And why at the end here, we're not talking about literal, what Job has is twice as much faith as he had before, instead of twice as many possessions. His possessions are his faith, are made up of his faith. So I'm going to leave you with that thought, that as, we just need to understand, as Bernard of Clairvaux said, when we reach that highest level, we love God and we love ourselves for God's sake, and we live that on God's terms because we're important to God. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Derek. Oh, I liked that about the twofold ending. He's having twice as much faith. I've never heard that before. But
Well, that's the literature teacher.
Yeah, but that ending is, I've always thought that ending is troublesome too.
Yeah,
And unfortunately, a lot of people look at that, and they only look at the ending.
yeah.
And they fail to consider all the suffering that happened, that led up to that ending. All right. You have one prayer request for Dennis and Laura as they are traveling. Okay. Anybody want to add to
I
that?
put in there, updated the request I had for my great niece,
From
Joey.
last, okay.
Yeah, she is safe and she's back home. We'll take a day at a time.
And I think last week I said Ruby Joe, it's Joe Ruby.
Joe Ruby.
Joe Ruby. All right. Anyone else want to add?
I would like to mention the wildfires that went on. We were just up in Colorado, and it became very real to us how terrible
Mm-hmm.
the situation is in the West. It really is very frightening.
What part of Colorado were?
We were near in Levita, where the spring fire, that big fires,
Uh-huh.
we went there when it
It's the
started.
western side of it.
That was the eastern, southeastern.
Okay.
So
So
they have,
is it just it's not just
no,
Colorado?
it's California,
California.
Utah, I mean, it's,
Cimarron, New Mexico.
yeah.
Just closed down, and I'm sure people are hurting economically, and there's not much economy there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Have they contained it? Is there any containment?
35%,
35%?
yeah, for that one.
Okay.
But it's become the, like, second largest fire in Colorado history. But it's everywhere.
A prayer of praise in the fact that they brought out 4
Yes.
boys, but a prayer of concern that the others.
They got 4 out.
It's 12 boys and their coach.
Yes,
right?
there's 13 total.
Soccer team. And that's in
Yeah.
Thailand.
Yeah, and I really think, one report I saw said the coach was brought out and the 3 boys, but there were 4 boys. 4 boys, you heard
Yeah,
boys? Okay.
that's what I heard, and they have them just standing in line, and they're putting full masks on their faces
To bring them out.
to bring them out. And apparently, they don't have to swim out, there are only certain places where they have to go under the water.
They pumped enough water out of there and they can walk out. They're gonna be in water, but they're gonna be able to walk out. But that's the reason they couldn't wait, because it
Yeah, it's
is
getting
monsoon.
worse, yeah.
And there is a big front storm coming through, and it'll fill back up with water. So, let's hope that they get that.
Vicky, did
That's
you?
what I was gonna tell
Oh,
you.
okay.
Yeah, I turned the TV off about 8 and that, so I just heard that the first two boys got out. And I sold my house, so I'm
Yes.
just so
know.
happy, so
I know.
thank you all for your prayers. God listens.
Yes.
Well, if no one has anything to add, let's join together in prayer.